One way to remember somebody's name is to look at them and try to find some kind of distinguishing facial feature or something that stands out. I'm sure you've heard that about how to remember people's name. If somebody's name is Mr. Brown, you might picture them falling in the mud. And then that's one way. If there's some other kind of feature that stands out, then you pick that and you try to associate it. So when I was in Mexico, people would ask me what my name was. ¿Cómo te llamas? And I would tell them Howard. And they would say, Howard. And so I didn't know what they were going to say. And they said, how are you? How are you? Because they were so excited that they knew an English expression and they could do a joke in English. It was like their favorite thing. So it would be like your name would be ¿Cómo está usted? That would be your name. And so I really like the idea that helps us kind of connect with people. And one of the things that I want to talk about is the worldview as it relates to the Great Commission is that really God came here to reconcile not only humanity to himself, but to each other. And as much as the world tries, it's very difficult for them to get along with each other, as you can see, because who's in charge of who gets along? Who sets the rules? I am sure many of you have realized that on Facebook or on YouTube, if you don't say the right thing, they ban you on Facebook. Some of my friends say they get put in Facebook jail for 30 days. They can't communicate. Or somebody's YouTube will be pulled off the channel because someone else is making the rules. And so when we talk about a biblical worldview, we're talking about, are there rules that are outside of humanity that we can all agree on? And so I like the idea that we look at the Great Commission as a way to relate to and connect to each other. And I'm just going to read you this because I think it's really important. The very message of the Great Commission is designed to move us towards each other. If we believe we have a personal relationship with God through his Son, Jesus, Yeshua, then we are obligated to share what we know with others. We are required and even commanded to reach out to others in love. But this is not a requirement without empowerment. It's not a command without resources. It's part of the seeking and finding that we are required to do as part of the process. We find out who we really are and who we can become as we believe the best for others and trust in him to fulfill the Great Commission through us. So I hope you can see that on a personal level, having a motivation to extend yourself beyond yourself, out of your comfort zone, actually brings out the best in you. I don't know if you've had friends that have ever done MLMs. You know what MLMs stand for? Multi-level marketing. Could be, and I'm not going to mention any of the names. But invariably, your friends will say they're part of this new thing and they want to get you involved and you will become part of it. And I'm one of those guys that I'll jump in and, if I have a few extra dollars, I'll join up. And so I will watch my friends become very open and gregarious with other peoples because they're trying to connect with them. And in business, it's the same way. The customer is right, and so you're trying to please the customer. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood about anybody who has a government job, but I'm sure that you have probably had a similar experience that I have where you go to a government agency. The ones I think about probably are like MVD or something, and that person gets paid regardless of how they treat you. It doesn't matter. And you kind of get that feeling sometimes like they don't really care. Like, look, they're punching a clock. They're just here to get a paycheck. And just, they just want to get through the day. Well, the Great Commission is the opposite of that. The Great Commission is like being in business. Your business is to connect with people, to relate to them. You're not making money. You're making relationships. And one of the things that I talk about in the virus and the code of everything is the idea that we must recognize that there are some inherent flaws in the world in which we live. And so what I offer to people is a scientific explanation as to what those flaws are, and try to relate them using terminology that people can connect with. And so I think part of what you do is, if you're, and I say if you're a salesman, but we're not trying to sell anything. Let's just say you're a relationship person and you're at a gathering and you're trying to connect with people. The first thing you want to do is introduce yourself. So that's how I would do the name. That's where the name comes in, and you try to remember their name. And then you find out a little bit about them. You know, what do they do? Now, if you find out that this person works at a certain company and you are using the competitor's product, and I'm just saying this for whatever sake, let's say you drive a Ford and your friend sells Chevys. You're probably going to want to just be nice to him and say, oh yeah, those Chevy trucks, you know, they're so cool. And you're probably not going to, if you want to have a connection with him, say, you know, those Chevy trucks, those are dumb. You know, and then he's going to turn around and say, you know what Ford stands for, right? Found on road dead. You know, that's not the way to build a relationship, because what you're doing is you're looking for things in common. But at the same time, what this message is how to relate to Gen-Zrs. And what are Gen-Zrs? So when we talk about a worldview, let's talk about how Gen-Zrs look at the world, because they're pretty much the people that have been born from 2000 till now. That's the approximate age. People before that are called millennials, up till about 65, and then there were the baby boomers. I don't know what else is in between, but so Gen Zers are going to be the recent ones from 2000. And what makes them so unique? They grew up with electronic devices, smartphones, usually since they were born. I mean, you can watch little kids know more about how to manipulate devices than their even parents. Sometimes they'll say, give me that, and then they'll grab it and they'll fix it for them, and the parent will say, well, how do I change this screensaver, or how do I put this desktop, or how do I get this, you know, I guess they call them what do they call those? Wallpapers? Yeah. And the kids know how to do all that stuff. So their worldview has been shaped by computers and by a world that tries to explain things scientifically. That's the way the media relates to them. That's the way movies relate to them. That's the way even their music relates to them. And the challenge for us, if we want to fulfill the Great Commission, the challenge for us is going to be how to relate these people. Just like if you were to walk in a room and introduce yourself, and you were going to look at some feature in a person, maybe their long hair, or you know, some other feature that stands out, some chiseled, you know, structured cheekbones or something, and you would use that and then try to connect them. I say we need to do that with Generation Z. We need to look at what is shaping them, find the outstanding features, and try to connect to them. So this idea of the vice theory came to me as I read the word, because it makes sense that we believe that God not only created the world and designed it this way, but when we use the words creation or intelligent design, we get pigeonholed. And do you know what I mean by pigeonholed? We get put in a box. I've had people say, oh, you're one of those people. You're one of those Christians. Oh, you believe in, and they'll say, do you really actually believe the world was made in 7 days? You know, that like you're stupid or something's wrong with you. You're dumb. And we've come to the conclusion, I've come to the conclusion that we've got to be very aware, just like if you were to mention Ford and Chevy to someone, if the person sells Chevys, we've got to understand what their terminology is. And the same applies to young people today. So I don't use the word, just to be quite frank with you, between you and me, I don't use those kind of words that I think that the media has already categorized as trigger words. And what do I mean by trigger words? Meaning that the media, that includes not only radio, not only TV, not only music, but it also includes influences like public school systems. It includes billboards. It includes culture. Those words have already been defined. And you know what I mean by defined? For example, and I'm not making fun of anybody, and so if I do or I offend someone, that's not my purpose. But you know the word awful. Do you know it used to mean something full of awe? That it was a good word. And you know nowadays kids will say, yo, that's so bad. It's sick, bro. And you know the Bible actually says that they're going to call good evil and evil good. So they have redefined words. And we used to sing the song, now we don our gay apparel. And kids have actually said to me, I didn't know that song was about that. And I go, no, it didn't mean that. It just meant that you were happy and you put on your festive clothes. So even in our generation, we are watching words being defined for us. Did you follow me? So when you say certain words, to you it means one thing. But in the mind of someone else who has been their worldview, that's what we're talking about, worldview, their idea of how everything functions has been shaped by the society, they hear something different. They hear, and I'm not saying that I believe this, I'm saying that's what they say. So if you even mention sometimes among a group of people, if you don't know anything about them, and you say God, Jesus, and the Bible, they just right away will shut you down sometimes. They'll just say, oh, you're one of those Christian people, you know, and they act like then you don't have anything relevant. After that, you've been discounted. You know what discounted means? Discounted means that you have very little value. So we were listening to some music and my wife said, oh, where did you get that music from? And I said, oh, I got it at Salvation Army. It was a Christian CD. It was for $1. You know, and it had all these artists. It was great, but it was discounted. So there wouldn't, if you were to get that album and someone else would have paid, you know, when it was out, I don't know what albums cost now, $20? What do CDs used to cost? Like $20 or something like that? And then you would see it now for $1. Somebody would say, oh, that's not worth much. It's been discounted. Or I heard this one guy say he knew that he had become a has-been when he saw his best-selling book selling at the dollar store for $1 because it was discounted, meaning that it didn't seem to have the value. We, as believers in the Bible, are being discounted by the world that we live in. They're trying to reduce the value of what we have to say. Therefore, I'm going to offer you an explanation. I call it new wine and new wineskins to believers, and to unbelievers I call it the ministry of the unknown God. I'm going to tell you a way to preach the gospel using only computer and scientific terminology. What do I mean for that? Well, in my second book, The Vitruvian Code Project, I want you to picture this. So this guy, this character, his name is Hillel, right? And he's going to be known as the great hacker. Now, Ed, we already gave him the insight, so he saw this. Well, the great hacker goes to this universal programmer, and he tells him, he says, hey, I noticed that the code that you use is different than the code that I use. I have what's called a reduced instruction set, meaning it's a very limited kind of code. And he said it's goody two-shoe, good only, limited code. But I noticed the code that you guys have is unlimited, and it has good and evil in it, and I want that code. And the universal programmer says, well, you can't handle the code. And he says, why not? He says, because we are the programmers, and yes, we know everything. We know good and evil, but it doesn't bother us because we're outside the program. But when we when we program something, the code reflects that and has the potential for evil in it. Just like if I hold up this water bottle, you know what potential energy is, right? That means when I let this go, that energy becomes kinetic and active and potentially destructive. Especially if your toe is there and there's no shoe there. I don't know if you've ever dropped anything. It doesn't matter. Sometimes you drop something just right and it hits right on a nerve of your toe. Have you ever done that? And you're like, oh my God, oh. And it doesn't have to be very heavy. Point being is that the universal programmer says, well, when that potential energy becomes kinetic, it'll corrupt you because there's a viral-like malware function in that code. And the universal programmer says, I don't care, I want it. And sure enough, he accesses that code, and because he's in the program, it's kind of like an if-then loop. I don't know if any of you have ever written code, but an if-then loop means there's a condition. So if X equals Y, then it runs this routine. Well, sure enough, if this entity in the program who has this flaw accesses this feature, it'll become active and contaminate him and corrupt him. Then this great hacker goes to these other beings in a different world, and he offers them the same deal that he has, and he says, hey, why do you have this limited goody two-shoe code that you have? Don't you want this unlimited good and evil code? And they're like, wow, yeah, because then you can be like the universal programmers. And they buy into that false logic, and they get corrupted too. And I don't know if you know about Minecraft, but they have a thing called a Minecraft map where the users create this world. And if the user dies, what happens to their world? Well, it dies with it. It ceases to exist. In many ways, what we see around us is kind of like that. The world is dying. And so the universal programmer says, I'm going to come into that world, and I'm going to bring the antivirus. And I'm going to do it selflessly, in selfless love for these programmed entities. And if you have a network connection to me, then you will have the access to the antivirus that the universal programmer brings. And then the last virus filter is something called death. And what death does is it filters out all the virus, because only virus-free entities can pass through the virus filter. And in computer terms, we call it artificial intelligence. If we can get a robot or a computer to think for itself, to decide for itself, and learn from its collective memories and experience, we call that artificial intelligence. And I say, that's really who we are. That's all that we really are, because when we die, our physical bodies don't go with us, right? Only those things that we thought and that we decided and that we learned. Now, if you have that antivirus connection to the universal programmer, you have something called permeability, and that means the ability to pass through a filter, right? And so you pass through this filter into the virus-free environment. If you don't have that antivirus and you don't have that network connection, then you get quarantined just like a computer. And kids know this. They get I'm an IT guy. So I run an antivirus program. It collects the virus code and then it quarantines it, right? Have you ever seen an antivirus program? Quarantines it, separates it. It puts it in a kind of a lockbox where nothing else can use it. And then on the other side, those who've passed through that virus filter, they live in a virus-free environment. And I was telling Ed, I walk up to where there's a group of kids anywhere. I do it at theaters. Ask my daughter if it's at a restaurant. She gets so embarrassed from me just walking up to kids anywhere. And I tell them the story. Hey, I'm working on this book that's going to be made a movie, and I tell them the story. And invariably, if there's more than a few kids, one of them might say, hey, wait a minute. Is that like the Bible? Are you trying to trick us? And I go, is it? And what I was telling Ed is that sometimes all we have to do is ask the right questions to get people to ask the right question. Then they start looking for the answer. So here's the question that we need to start asking in the worldview. And as Christians, I don't think, and I'm not trying to offend anybody or hurt anybody's feelings, I don't think we've really done a good job in answering why there is evil in the world. I really don't. We know that people have a choice, so I get that. We get free will. But the idea that science and computers can lend some insight to us, I think is amazing. Because if you think about it, once the virus is active, it has to run its course, and then it collects wherever it collects, and then it can separate that which is prone to destruction and that which is prone to redemption. And in computer terms, I use the word restoration. People will tell me, say, hey, my computer has a virus. What do I need to do? And if the virus is bad enough, I was telling Ed the same thing, you actually have to tell me, what do you want to save? Your pictures, your videos, your documents, what do you want to save? Because if the virus is that bad, I have to take those things out. And then I have to put a new operating system. I have to completely reformat that hard drive. And if you think about it, that's like salvation. We get a new operating system. We get a new world view. Does that make sense? A different paradigm. And then that's what shapes the way we think. So our music, our videos, our films, the way that we talk, the way that we think, all of those things should now be shaped by that new operating system. And if you tell a youngster and explain it using computer terminology, they get it. That's not something weird. They're not going to go, oh yeah, bro, you're like all narrow-minded, man. You're just like one of those Christians. They're not going to say it. They're just going to go, yeah, that's just computers. That's how they work. So we're using computer terminology and scientific terminology like DNA as a code. Therefore, in biology, we use a code as a construct. Therefore, we say all the sciences, I say all the sciences need to be parallel. And I have a picture that I use. It's a crossword puzzle. And you know what a crossword puzzle is, right? If you figure out what is in the horizontal plane, let me find it for you here. So if you don't know what is in 13 down, see where 13 down is? But you know what 12 across is, and you know what 19 across is, and you know what 22 across is, guess what happens? 13 down magically appears. It's like Lucky Charms. It's magically delicious. And you see it. So what I'm suggesting to people today is that we need to take our science terminology, our computer terminology, and we need to come up with a construct so that it fits the missing parts and it becomes clear. And so people want to know, where does evil come from? People want to know, why is evil allowed to exist? At the end, all that potential evil that became kinetic, just like when it became kinetic, will then be wrapped up again, just like a computer, and quarantined and separated. There will be balance in the program, if that makes sense. So it sounds weird because you go, well, that's, but a youngster says, oh, he knows that, because in order for your computer to function correctly, things have to be in sync and things have to be in balance. And there's something called homeostasis. That means where there's equilibrium, right? That's a scientific principle. That's like one of the laws of thermodynamics, where there has to be eventually all high energy moves to areas of low energy because it tries to create an equilibrium. So my point is that I want you to consider trying to explain things, and what I offer is a different paradigm as far as sharing the gospel, the Great Commission, to connect with Gen-Zrs. And now we know that there are some inherent dangers that we're seeing now manifest in Generation Z. We're seeing some of the highest incidents of suicide and depression and violence, internal and external, the inability to communicate socially. We're seeing that they want instant gratification. We see that they want total control. Why? Because that's what they do on their devices. What I say is that inherent in this world that exists, everything has this viral-like function. Well, what does that mean? Well, the Bible calls it sin, the fallenness of humanity. All I'm doing is offer some potential computer and scientific terminology to explain it. Does that make sense? To people who don't even know what sin, they just think, well, yeah, sin is just something you do wrong. No, sin is the condition of this mortal flesh that is prone to destruction. that without redemption, without restoration, we're headed for destruction. It's your natural inclination to go downhill, to eventually head in the direction. What does it say? The wages of sin are death. And so an electronic device that doesn't have embedded in it morality, positive spiritual things, will lead you away from not only connecting with others, but guess who else? The universal programmer, the God that exists. It isn't just because it is inherently evil, it's because there's no morality built into it. Does that make sense? Most of these games now, like Halo and what are, I wrote them all down. They're like first shooter games. I mean, you know that is not really good for a child to spend hours and hours shooting and blowing people's heads off. And it desensitizes them to the suffering of humanity. And ultimately, there are a percentage of youngsters who actually have trouble distinguishing reality from virtual reality. The Columbine shooters said that they practiced shooting people to the point that when they went in there to shoot them, they just looked at it like it was a game. Bam, 20 points, bang, 30 points. You know what I mean? They were disconnected from the reality that exists. And so when you know that there's a viral-like malware function in the code, when you explain that that's what sin is, but you can see the effect, then you got to start embedding morality into the games and apps and the programs that the kids listen to and the music and all that stuff. That means that we have to, as Christians, our worldview is to restore the world. That's why Jesus said we're salt and light. Salt preserves and light exposes. Remember you're saying, Ken, about the light? So what does that mean? Well, it means the church today has to be willing to consider something like this as a message to reach Gen-Zrs, much like C.S. Lewis did. You all know C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, or J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. They were trying to get some kind of mechanism to connect with people to avoid the false pretense of shunning intellectual shunning. You know what shunning means, right? It was used like in typical would be, let's say, and once again, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but there were some movies, I think there's some Amish people, and if one of the kids was found, let's say with an iPod or something like that, and he didn't want to conform to the rules, they would shun him. And shunning meant they distanced themselves, they disconnected from them, and the person felt lonely. They felt isolated. And so that is what the world is trying to do to us because they don't agree with our worldview, if that makes sense. But if we say, hey, here's a different worldview using your terminology that you guys use every day and your scientific explanations, then at least they have to say, well, I guess, you're just using words that we use. I don't agree with you, but those are the words we use, so, right? Because you're not going to hear intelligent design being taught at UNM, are you? You're not going to hear creation taught at UNM, are you? But you hear about programming, right? And you hear about scientific principles. You hear about DNA, right? Do you get my point? That's what I want you to think about. I want you to seriously consider that we need to start to speak the language. If we want to reach Gen-Zers, the kids born from 2000 to now, we need to understand their world that they live in, use their terminology, but also have an answer to them, what to do, because they're lost. They don't understand what's going on. They literally don't get it. And when you just try to tell them, well, you spend too much time on your phone. Yeah, right. Like that just goes in. I can't push this through. Okay. And out. Because they don't connect with it. But if you say there's a virus in the code of everything, they're like, ooh, what is that? That sounds like the Matrix. And I'm not saying the Matrix is not a biblical film in that concept. But what the world does is it takes biblical ideas and it then distorts them. I'll give you some good illustration. Star Wars, the idea of good versus evil, that's all kind of the classic structure of Satan versus, God. All of those, the Avatar, you know Avatar, right? That's the idea of taking the consciousness, remember I told you the AI, and putting it in another organism. The ideas of the Matrix itself. Do you know the character Neo actually goes into the Matrix kind of like a messianic figure to try to bring them that salvation, that restoration that they do it? The Avengers. The Avengers is a copycat of what God wants to do on the other side of the virus filter. I've explained it to Ed also when I was here. I said, when you pass through that vast virus filter, you get superpowers. I tell the kids, and they go, superpowers? Cool, dude, what's that? I go, well, yeah, I know a dude who could manipulate quantum particles in history. They go, no. I go, yeah, 2,000 years ago, there was this guy, and he manipulated quantum particles. He could take hydrogen and oxygen and put them in a lattice so that the electromagnetic field was aggregate and it would support gravitational pressure and you could walk on it. They go, dude, who was that? And I go, you don't know who that was? And somebody go, is that Jesus? And I go, yeah. You never thought about that, did you? Jesus said, greater works would you do because I go to my Father. What did he do? He walked on water. What did he do? He multiplied food. How did he multiply food? We do that with energy. We split the atom, and how much energy did we get when we split that atom? Thousands of times more energy than was in that little atom. Well, we know now that there's a duality of matter. You know that all matter now has wave and particle in them, that's what makes them up. We figured that out because we discovered that about light. Now we're discovering it about matter. When you get down to the very small level where the subatomic particles are actually shaped, the quarks, the bosons, the leptons, the gluons, the muons, all these subatomic particles, they act as both a wave and a particle. In fact, we have something scientifically, a theory called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle that says when you get down that small and you start measuring something, you're not certain it's there past the very moment that you measured it, nor does it exist in that spot anymore, because everything is kind of moving and there's even even molecule. All you gotta do is look at molecules in a glass of water. You know that they're bouncing all over, the energy that's in there. So my point is that all of these principles help us as Christians explain things to the world that they themselves don't really understand. They don't know what 13 down is. They don't know what dark energy. Dark energy is 16 down. Dark matter is 17 down. Heisenberg uncertainty principle is, and I'll say down, but we could look at some other ones. It could be like 32 across. All of these things are things we can answer because we have a biblical worldview. We now see how it relates to computers and science, and we can use that terminology to reach this generation and explain to them the dangers inherent in electronic devices that don't have morality embedded in them. And that's the challenge for you today. That's what this message is about, to start thinking, wow, maybe I really do need to think about this in a different way to reach people. I honestly believe that we're going to have to start doing this. Now, there are always going to be people who the Holy Spirit will touch them, and people just come to salvation and they feel the need to confess their sin, and they need to feel the need to be born again. That's happened sometimes just when you're talking with someone. There are times I've been with someone when you just love someone, because the goal of this, here's the point, the goal of this is the selfless love that was shed for us is what we can now give to others. That's how we connect to each other. There's times when you just put your arm around someone and someone's hurting and they'll just break down and start crying. You know what I'm saying? Because they feel that, they sense that love. There's times you'll go to a service or something like that. Nobody's even preaching or anything. And all of a sudden the Holy Spirit just comes on people and they're just repenting. Like, oh man, I need help. They just fall on their face. But there are an awful lot of people who we are not explaining ourselves to, and the questions are not making them think. God gave you a brain to think. And we as Christians have got to start asking the right questions and posing the right questions to get people to think, because nowadays they're just entertained. Almost 24 hours a day, kids can be entertained. You can watch YouTube. You have a choice on YouTube. My kids will tell you, what do I watch? What do I watch? What am I interested most of the time? Heather, what do I see? Listen, I can't learn enough. I cannot get, I want to go watch a movie, but then I'll start watching YouTube about something, and I'm like, I never even got around to watching the movie, because my desire to learn is now greater than my desire to be entertained. And that's how we learn about God. If you have a desire to learn, who's the one who programmed everything? As you learn about the truth of how things function, guess who you were learning about? Now, the Word is how we connect with it, because I call it like a code book. It recalibrates your thinking. As you memorize the Word, and this is the hardest part I have with my teenagers, as you memorize that Word, it recalibrates, it puts the default settings, it updates you to protect you from the viruses, right? Just like system updates. It restores your computer to the proper running and functioning that it should have in order to exist in a virus-ridden world. Does that make sense? The Word is the key, because it is, not only is it God speaking to you, but it is written in such a way that it is both food, it recalibrates you, it's life to you. It's all of those things that you need, if you think about it in terms of a computer. What would you need a computer to run? You need some kind of power. You need a power source. You need energy. You need to have some kind of memory. You need to have some kind of logic board, right? All of those things have to, remember I talked about balance? Remember? Equilibrium? All of those things have to be functioning. The world is not functioning correctly today. There is a viral-like malware function in everything, and we call it sin, but we can explain it. I think we can offer a plausible, concise, consistent, comprehensive explanation of what sin is. Never before have we been able to do that. Now, they can laugh at us, but at least we have a consistent, our crossword puzzles filled in. Does that make sense? I don't wonder about dark energy, dark matter, or Heisenberg uncertainty principle. I even know, in my opinion, the answer, and Ken and I talked about that. We're hoping to speak at the University of Colorado in Boulder, hopefully, maybe in a few months. I want to offer a plausible explanation for a question that Einstein himself could not answer. And if you know anything, it's called the spooky action at a distance. He could not explain how subatomic particles could be so entangled that regardless of the distance, that if you change the polarity on one, like made it positive, the other subatomic particle that was entangled instantly flipped and reacted instantly. He said that shouldn't be, because there's a law equals MC2. There's a speed of light is the fastest speed known to a human. Well, no, that's really easy. It makes total sense to me. If I have a pixel on the screen of the computer, and I have another pixel over here, let's say I had a screen that was 3,000 miles long. Would it matter how far that pixel was from the other? No. Why? Because the program underneath operates it instantaneously. Does that make sense? So this world, in one sense, is like a screen. I'm not saying it is a screen. I'm not saying this is a computer. I'm saying it functions like a computer program. I talked to Ed. I said, look, we made a lot of mistakes. When we were first trying to find out how to fly, we thought we had to flap our wings. We were trying to mimic nature. Until we learned the principles of flight and then drag and thrust and lift, we were not doing it correctly. So we cannot directly imitate nature. So even though there's a biology and a code, we just can't say, oh, this world is just a computer program, because it's more, because there's an element of us that somehow certain bits of whatever that code is don't exist just in this dimension. Does that make sense? Because they continue to exist past this. That's what that whole virus filter is about. So don't get me wrong, and don't say, oh, he believes that we're in a computer. No, I'm saying it's like a computer. I'm saying whatever this world does is a shadow. Doesn't it say that this is a shadow of things to come? But what did Jesus say? He said, if you don't understand earthly things, you can't understand what? Heavenly things. I am saying that Jesus used examples of the farmer, the sow, the seed, and I'm saying we have those same principles with computers. We use seeds to create random numbers. We use seed to create a subroutine. We need to be able to speak to this generation in their terminology. So this whole talk is just to get you to think about that, to get you to start ask some questions, to start to go, oh, wow, man, I kind of see that. And hopefully it confirms in your thought process how we can take the Great Commission, which is the ability to reach and relate to others for God, right? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, right? That's what this whole thing is about, and his righteousness. And then what? All these things will be added unto you. We really are obligated, people, to start to connect to people. And if you don't want to connect to people, then you're not going to be the person who God's destined you to be. You're like the person in an MLM. When you have a vision of yourself and you're trying to connect with people, it'll bring out the best in you. You're willing to go, and I'm not saying you go to door, but you're willing to call your friends up, because that's kind of embarrassing to say, hey, there's this really cool speaker and I want you to come over here. And then it's some kind of like MLM marketing scheme, right? And there's a whole bunch of people, they're all, yeah, right on. And they're going to sell these products. And so it's a normal soap product. And instead of it selling for $3, it sells for $30. And yeah, if you come part of my chain and my line, you get part of this, you get $10, and then you get another $1. And before long, it's crazy, right? But, okay, that person who is trying to better themselves really is becoming a better person in the process by reaching out to others. Do you understand? That's what the Great Commission is. It's designed to get you off your couch and out into the streets and start trying to relate to people in a way that they find something of value. Because every person has a need. Every person has a need. It could be they're sick. It could be that they have mental issues, emotional issues. It could be they have financial issues. Everybody has a need, and God has some kind of plan for them, a program. And just like that. Don't we tell kids, hey, get on with the program? So now, are you kind of seeing what I'm trying to get you to do? The Great Commission gets you off the couch. The need to reach Gen-Zrs makes you think about computers and science in a way to relate to them. And it makes you a better person in the process because it expands your thinking and it helps you to connect to one another. That's what the worldview is all about. And as we have this worldview, we then have a way to connect with these kids, because statistically, our Generation Z is really struggling. Folks, I do not think that people appreciate how desperate it is for these kids. They literally cannot communicate with each other. They will sit next to each other in a group and not even talk to each other. What do? Texting, Snapchatting, Instagramming. It's the weirdest thing ever. How can you be right next to someone and you don't look them in the eye and talk to them? I've said this on some other presentations I've done. That is the strangest thing in humanity ever. And we're watching it and we're not even puzzled by it. We just go, oh, that's weird, oh, dumb kids. I can't even talk to each other. Yes, but what does it mean? It means we're not giving them, do you see what I'm saying? What they need. And so they've opted out. I have asked young people, would you live in a virtual reality world 24 hours a day with superpowers and be paralyzed? And they're the first generation ever to say, yes. Let me live in a virtual world. I don't care if I'm paralyzed or what. But if I have superpowers and I can do whatever I want to do, and I will do that. Now that is crazy. That's crazy. But that's the world that we live in. So we've got to take our worldview and we've got to shape it in such a way that we can connect with them. So I'm hoping that at the end, you know, the way that people connect with me and say, how are you? is the way you're going to find something to connect with other people. You need to find how are them.